This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane line is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here.
Ho, ho, ho. That's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there.
We're looking at 10.5 and 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah, copy.
Welcome back, podcast listeners, to the start of this season 3. Can you believe it? 39 editions in, almost 50 hours of quality podcast listening. And we're back, more energized than ever, to bring you in-depth stories from the heart of our sport. And I can promise you, we have lots of fascinating guests lined up over the coming months. It's great to have you along. To celebrate the new season, we thought we'd ramp up the authenticity and introduce this edition from out on the Solent. It's a pretty still day, but I'm at the helm of a lovely little classic, making my way west towards the Needles. It's been a windy and cold few weeks here in Cowes, but right now, well, you can hear it, there's a stillness, a calm about, and it's great to be out here. We've been back from the America's Cup in Auckland just over a month now, and I wanted to thank you all for your support and kind words whilst we were there. It was a real privilege for both of us to work on such a fascinating cup, especially in the current global travel scenario, and with so many people unable to travel to Auckland to support their team. And we were delighted with your Cup podcast support. The America's Cup editions were through the roof popular, and we really hoped they added something to your viewing experience. If you're mourning the drama of AC36, then fear not. This edition, I promise, will take you right back. Before we introduce this month's guest, I want to run something by you all. I want to know what you think. Tim and I adore this podcast. There's a lot of care, a lot of work that goes into every month, but we do spend an increasing amount of time and a not inconsiderable amount of money producing these pods. And thanks to you, we've now reached pretty impressive listener numbers, which is great. But the podcast landscape is changing. The more popular platforms are introducing subscription models. It now costs us to appear on some of these platforms. With the massive rise in popularity of podcasts generally, there's a real interest in advertising around well-supported pods. But for us, we're reluctant. We work hard on the pod and don't want that intimate listener experience we try to create being interrupted by ad spots. If we can, we'd like to keep the podcast ad-free, but it's definitely an option. We're also reluctant to head down the subscription route, now made so much easier as the big players like Apple introduce subscription into their podcasting platforms. So, after much discussion, we're going to continue the ad-free, non-subscription, fully immersive podcast experience. But we'd like your support. We're going to ask you, the listener, the end user of our work, if you can, to join us on the ride. We've looked at all the popular monthly contribution options. We don't like that, so we've opted for the simplest option we could find. It's dead simple. You go online, head over to buymeacoffee.com. Yep, you heard me, buymeacoffee.com, then /sailing podcast. And you can contribute as much or as little as you like, much like Netflix, digital TV, or however else you watch and listen. But you decide the level of support. Have a think about it. It's not been an easy decision. The quality of the podcast to us is key. But to help us put in the time, we'd like your support. Our sport is so diverse. It's filled with passionate, fascinating people. And we love bringing you these stories. So if you're enjoying what we do, it's super simple to help keep the podcast rolling. Okay, enough of all that. Let's get on with it. Our guest this month is truly one of my favourite people to interview. And I've interviewed him a lot. I feel like I've shared his career highs and lows over the past 2 decades, and he always delivers what we need. By now, I'd say we're friends. He certainly knows that I know just what it all means to him. The skipper of American Magic, Terry Hutchinson, truly wears his heart on his sleeve. In part 2, Terry is brutally honest about the 36th America's Cup, and if you followed the Cup, you'll know what's coming. In a harrowing account, he relives that capsize, personally being trapped underwater and all that followed, watching everything he and his team had worked so hard to create nearly sink to the bottom of the Hauraki Gulf. It's an emotional tale. In this part though, part 1, we learn about Terry's early Cup experiences and just how he got so good. In some ways, Terry seems quite complex, renowned as an absolutely ruthless and talented tactician who leaves little on the racetrack. But on land, he's fiercely loyal to his band of brothers and emotional about the responsibility he carries for his owners, his team, and his family. We were in some ways reluctant to record this podcast when we did, waiting as long as we could in Auckland before meeting up. You'll hear it often in his voice. 6 weeks after being knocked out, Terry is still going to work, still wearing his uniform, still fighting for the future of his team. It's all still very raw. You'll hear that. That's the passion of the man. I hope you enjoy the time I spent with Terry Hutchinson.
I don't shave if we're having a good regatta. It's one of my idiosyncrasies. I was sitting in my religion class at St. Mary's High School and I thought, there's a big race going on. I need to go and watch this. I can imagine having to unbolt the thing after 132 years. That was not easy.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast, Terry. We're here at the American Magic team base in Auckland, just a few days before the America's Cup match kicks off. I was keen to catch you before the craziness resumes. I suspect right now, just a few weeks from being eliminated from the Cup, the last thing you might want to do is talk about yourself for 90 minutes. So a massive thanks for making it happen.
So only because it's you, Shirley.
Well, I'm really grateful and I'm sure it's going to be great. I mean, I did wonder, Terry, if you've ever listened to any of the pods, if you actually know what you're in for.
I've listened to some of them, but I haven't managed my way all the way through. And as always, we're incredibly appreciative of the great work that you've done. And I have had the benefit of watching some of the other, your previous shows that you've always done. And so it's an honor to be here.
Well, it's interesting you mention that because we may not have podcast history, Terry, but we do have some history.
Yes, we have mainsail history.
Yes, and every time I look at that smallish scar on your chin, I'm reminded of a rather ill thought out interview location and can't help but feel a bit responsible.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners how that battle wound came about.
Yes, well, it's quite a unique battle wound. And I think we met in Istanbul, Turkey at an Extreme 40 regatta where you were with us and the Artemis Racing. And that whole circuit was incredible. And we had a day of racing where we'd sailed quite well. And you said, I really would like to do this. I want to see, we want to get you to do this very authentic straight blade shave on your face with a local barber in Istanbul. And I said, Shirley, I don't shave if we're having a good regatta. It's one of my little idiosyncrasies of good or bad luck. And you're like, and in typical Shirley fashion, you convinced me to do it. So I did it. So I'm lying in the chair. The gentleman does the straight blade, gets my face nice and hot, is going through his process, and about 3/4 of the way through it, nicks my chin. Apparently pretty deep because I bled like a stuck pig. And then he grabbed his little thing of wax and covered it up really quickly. And I do think the next day we went out and had an absolute shocker. Although we did manage, only through the fault of Ian Williams, we did manage to win the regatta in the last race. So
I'll bring that up a little bit later.
Must have been some good luck there.
I suppose as someone who doesn't shave their chin, I didn't realize that I couldn't actually ask you a question, that you couldn't talk whilst being shaved. So learned a lot, but every time I look at you, I'm reminded of that moment. Terry, we're we're sitting here in the team base, as I said. What was the hospitality unit? Much of the base now, it's all packed up, ready to go somewhere. It does feel a little bit weird, like the big top without the circus.
Yeah.
We're going to talk much more about the Cup later, Terry, but I wondered how Terry Hutchinson is doing, how hard a few weeks it's been for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, you run the full gamut of emotions still. And I've been incredibly fortunate to have supportive family, have supportive great principals, have supportive team around us. You really learn the true meaning of that word when you go through moments like this in your sporting career. And sitting here, it's been the last 4 weeks have really been enlightening because we've been conducting a pretty thorough team debrief process. And the kind of the methodology that we chose was an anonymous survey to the entire team, which has been really well received and thoughtful and thorough and critical, which it needed to be. So that's one part of the process. The other part of the process is one-on-one interviews with team members that I've conducted and just really spending time talking. No set agenda, no set questions, just letting the conversations flow. And that's ranged anywhere from 1 hour to 3.5 or 4 hours with each team member. But you roll through, it's taken me literally the entire month of February and into March to get through about 60 of those. And that's once you can remove a little bit of the emotion from what happened, the only thing that ends up happening there is you learn about what team members think that we could do better, what we didn't do well, how we can, if we're given the opportunity for AC 37 and an AC 75, how we go about winning that regatta. And I think the one thing that I was a bit probably too optimistic at the start of this program is really underestimating the strength of, we knew the teams around us were good. And, I think really the defender probably of all the teams has, really in a smart way, managed their resource and also developed in a way that we didn't consider developing, and some of that is just no more complicated than the lack of infrastructure. Our pathway to Defiant and then to Patriot started with a mule. And you'd have to think that the other team's pathways to their development was through simulation and high quality design tools in that regard. And so for us, it's probably one of the things that's come out of those debriefs is, gaining the perspective of looking at it in a different way and trying to capture all the things that we did well, which we did a lot well. And that's the other thing that comes out to the person. Nobody has said we're not sailing next week for no other reason other than what happened. We capsized the boat and put a hole in it and put ourselves under insurmountable pressure to just get the boat back out on the water. So the mistake would be, though, to think that that's the only reason that we're not racing next week. You can look at it in isolation and go, yep, that's it. But I don't believe that. And I didn't believe it prior to the crash. And I don't believe it sitting here today. You can always see that there's areas that you can be better. And there are a lot of areas that we could be better and we will be better, but that doesn't overshadow either what we did really well.
We're going to talk about American Magic later on in the interview, but it's interesting, Terry, you're still very much on. I mean, you didn't answer my question.
I didn't?
I just wanted to know. I wanted to know how
I'm
you
doing?
were. It's tough, isn't it, when something ends like this? How's Terry Hutchinson?
I can't stop. So I get up and I go to work and I'm thinking about AC 37. And probably partly I can't stop because it's still too close. So
we'll come back to all of that. Let's start by finding out. Let's start by finding out, a bit more about the aspiring young Terry Hutchinson. I mean, where did it all begin? What was the young Terry like? Describe that young lad.
Describe that young person. pig-headed, incredibly driven without any real discipline. Not always seeing what I wanted, but no real mechanism to understand how to get there or how to go about the process of winning. Probably arrogant. The great Angus Phillips one time wrote that I was a garrulous, barrel-chested brawler. And I had to go to the dictionary and look up half those words. And so it probably, defines the younger side. And yet, I was always incredibly competitive when it came to the sailing side.
I've heard a story. I think
Stories.
Well, I think it came from you. You were skipping school to go and watch the Cup when it was in Newport. What do you remember of that?
Yeah. Well, there was this great sailors hangout in Annapolis called Marmaduke's Pub that is no longer in existence. And the owner of the pub was a J-24 sailor named Bill Heim. And I was the only young person that they would let in the bar because our family had a J-24, and that's what we grew up on, kind of my teen years racing between that and the 420s. And so on the day that in December that Dennis, in race 7, I left high school. I was sitting in my religion class at St. Mary's High School, and I thought, there's a big race going on. I need to go and watch this. And so I walked out of I asked my teacher if I could go and go to the bathroom, and I just kept walking and walked down to Marmaduke's there in Eastport and saddled up on the corner of the bar and watched Dennis, go from winning that race in brilliant fashion to not winning. And after the race was over, school was still going on, and so I walked back into school. It wasn't quite going on, but I walked back, and lo and behold, everybody was wondering where I was, and my mom was there wondering, what did you do? It's like, well, race 7 of the America's Cup is going. I had to go and watch this, so that's what I did. It just seemed like the thing to do at the time.
I mean, it must have been a terrible moment in the sailing community in the States, when the New York Yacht Club had to unbolt the cup from the trophy room and hand it to the Australians.
Yeah. Oh, I can't think of anything harder to do. I think being in the game and in the sport in the manner that we have been over really the last 20 years and having really only once been in the situation in the match to experience it all the way through, I can't imagine how hard that would have been. And yeah, I mean, and having had the opportunity and perspective to sail with Tom and work for Dennis, but Tom in particular, who is a tactician and, is without question, a great friend and mentor, but, having won the cup, having lost the cup, having won the cup, he tells the story of there was everything they were doing on that last day just felt right. And so when they split, it was like, we've been getting every single one right. And so this is not that big of a deal. And they were, as he pointed it out too, they were just that annoying distance ahead that they kind of had to sail their own race. And we all know Newport in the fall can be a little bit tricky, and in the direction they were sailing in, it was tricky. And but listening to him tell the story, it's like he is absolutely right there in the moment, which is just awesome. But that's probably what the America's Cup does to us. So I can imagine having to unbolt the thing after 132 years. That was not easy.
You always remember your losses.
Yeah.
Much more vividly.
Yeah, no, that's the unfortunate thing about losing.
As you know, Terry, I'm working here in the commentary box with Kenny Reid, who's a touch older than you, and I asked him what he could remember of the young Terry Hutchinson when he first hit the scene. He used the words driven, talented. I mean, you were twice College Sailor of the Year. And he alluded to a few disagreements on the water. Looking back, how accurate is that?
He's being incredibly polite. And definitely some arguments. I would say that summarization is probably spot on. And, there's a couple things that Kenny probably doesn't know that I'll share. As you rightfully point out, he's 7 or 8 years older than I am. And so when I was coming up through college and really in the, kind of 16, 17, 18, Kenny was out of college and kind of developing his skills in the J24 and really becoming one of the, best sailors in the world through that. But because he was such a great college sailor and was evolving outwards, he was an easy role model. So my Laser 2 at the U.S. Youth Championships shared the same sail number that his J24 did. And I doubt he knows that, but that's a little fact. But when you raced against somebody as good as him, much in the same way that when you race against people around this harbor, you always knew that when you had the opportunity to beat them in a race, that you were doing something well. And the harder he beat on us, the better it made us. And that was just, there was always this component of he probably could sense that there were other people coming, and he was always going to make sure he beat them down as hard as he possibly could to remind them that hard work was never going to, you were always going to have to work hard if you wanted to get races off of them. And so that was the approach that he followed. Very much a hockey mentality, racing against Kenny.
He said there was never really fisticuffs, but it came close.
That's a stretch. He's much taller than I am. But he's a great sailor, and he's having the opportunity to work with him in Stars and Stripes and work with various other helmsmen. I mean, Kenny's incredibly talented, and he was, it's just for whatever reason he didn't go as hard into the America's Cup as some of us have. But I learned more racing against him about having mental toughness. And if you were ever going to beat a competitor, like truly gain the upper hand on them, you needed to do a lot of things well on the water. And then you also needed to make sure that when they were throwing their absolute best at you, that you weren't going to flinch. And that's where he was really good. He was always there on the day.
When did you start to have an awareness that you were quite good at this?
That's a trick question. Well, you're only as good as your last race, Shirley. And so sitting here, you don't really feel all that good. And when you think about, I truly, the older I've gotten, in all seriousness, that statement takes a lot more meaning, because you kind of get to a certain spot. And, it's probably what, back to Kenny, what he kind of, as he evolved his career through the J24 class and then out of the J24 class and taking on new challenges, he kind of got to a point where it was always assumed he was going to win. And so by changing, something that we've instilled in ourselves in the past really 10 years of racing, by kind of changing that mentality of, you really truly are only as good as your last race, then you're always working for perfection. And it always gives you something to grow upon for the next time you go out on the water.
In the intro, I list some of your achievements in the sport. I mean, it's a crazy long list of championship wins in all kinds of boats.
Couple things missing, though.
How could you do that? I mean, just think back, step from boat to boat, team to team, and deliver to win. What did Terry Hutchinson bring to a boat?
Yeah, I think when I reflect back on a lot of those teams and a lot of the success and failures, I mean, there was always a level of hard work and discipline that has developed over the years. There was a lot of losing inside of that. And the thing that ends up happening when you get knocked around enough is that, you have to have the ability to get up and look at the mistakes and keep, as cliche as it sounds, you have to, or you don't progress. And so one of the things that we always kind of tried to pride ourselves on, regardless of who we worked for at the time or what team we were with, was just a higher level of professionalism. And there were, personally, I've been incredibly fortunate to work for Jim Richardson and John Kilroy and Doug DeVos and Hap Fouth, and these group of owners that always provided everything that you needed to win, and in return you needed to provide them the same level of professionalism and expectations. So if they're going to make the investment, you have to bring to the table what they're expecting. And it's not like it was ever communicated, I need you to do this, 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 and this. It's just expected. And it took a while to understand that working hard for them, being honest, always, taking the position of protecting, your owner's best interest and representing them well in any of the competitions that you're doing. And there were times, certainly with Jim and the Barking Mad, where I know I let us down, and how he handled certain situations, but he was always committed to the longer, the end game of in developing his teams, that he allowed it all to happen. And incredibly lucky to have gone through and worked for some of these guys, because they're legends in their own right. If you win, then you're carrying the legend of Dennis Conner and the Stars and Stripes, and if you don't win, then it's equally as painful. It wasn't until I got into Team New Zealand that I realized how we were never ever going to compete at Stars and Stripes.
Well, all that success got you noticed. And in 2000, you were on America One as main sheep trimmer with Paul Caird, who was skipper and CEO. I mean, your first America's Cup experience. How did all that come about, and how excited were you to be part of it all?
Well, you get goosebumps. I do, sitting here thinking about that, because I was in 1998, we were in San Francisco at the J24 Worlds, and Paul had just come off of winning the Whitbread. And there was a lot of discussions about America One getting going, and I had done some racing with John in the Corel 45s, and getting to know him, and
John Kostecki.
And getting to know him, and developing a relationship there with the intention of wanting to be part of the America One team. And at the J24 Worlds that we ended up winning, I met with Paul and with Bob Billingham at John's recommendation, and joined America One, which was, in retrospect, you couldn't be any luckier, because Paul at the time was at the top of his game. John, is always at the top of his game, regardless of what he's doing. And it was an incredible opportunity to come in and race with really, really good, experienced people. And that was probably one of the best things about it, because I ended up trimming the main. I wanted to be more of a strategist or secondary helmsman in developing the boats, but and so I wasn't really a great main trimmer. Sean Clarkson helped as much as everybody else did on the boat. It's like, trim it to the mark, Terry. That way you're going to be good. But what that it definitely taught at the time, and this is more of a hindsight comment, but what it taught me was the importance of the entire team, the importance of learning all the different positions on the boat, because in essence that helps, when you're making decisions to push it into a top mark or a bottom mark or any given situation, understanding what everybody has to do in that choreography. Those boats were boat handling dependent, and as the racing got better and better, the team that could push it the hardest would inevitably come out winning a lot of the situations. And so that was one of the things that I definitely took out of that experience, and then hanging around and absorbing the process that we had there, and seeing how Paul and John and really everybody operated. It was awesome.
Yeah, what did you learn from Paul? How did he operate?
I think probably and I didn't know it at the time. I think what I probably learned the most from Paul was there were certain things that just didn't matter, and he was really good at ignoring those things. He was really good at at sailing the boat. He did a very good job of striking the balance of steering the boat and running the program, and handing off other responsibilities to John and to Bruce Nelson and to Hookie, who was designing, kind of a lot of those things he did a really good job at. He's a really smart guy, and so he always has the ability to manage a lot of things well. And I think that as I've evolved out of that, he's really good at that. And there's certain things I'm not good at, and having seen what he was really good at, and then as you develop your game and you race against people, you learn strengths and weaknesses about them, but also about yourself. And I think that's probably, in retrospect, one of the things that I took out of it. That was, and at the time he was one of the few guys that had as much time in the boat that he had in that class of boat, and that also made him really good.
You were back again in 2003 here in Auckland, tactician, calling the shots for Dennis Connor's Stars and Stripes. Now, Terry, we love a good Dennis story on the podcast. What do you remember of Dennis at that time, and how would you describe his leadership style?
Well, there are certain things working for Dennis. I mean, so, you hear the 1983, watching him lose. And then as a fan watching him win in 1987, which was just awesome. So then you fast forward to, I think it would have been the spring of 2001. I was out in San Diego doing a One Design 35 regatta with Steve and Fred Howe. And I had been doing some sailing with Kenny, and he connected me to Dennis. And so I went to Dennis's house in San Diego. Dennis actually came out on the water and watched this race all weekend. And then I went to his house for dinner, and he cooked this incredible chicken curry. And it was him and Daintree, and we had this wonderful dinner. But I got off the boat and I went to his house, and when I walk into his house, he's got this replica of the America's Cup. And I was like you do. Yeah, as you would. Yeah. But I went in and I took a shower, and I had to call Shell from the bathroom and say, "You're not going to believe this. I'm in Dennis Connor's house. This is the coolest thing going." And that's really probably describes it, because it was to be considered to be part of his team, having watched everything that he achieved, was really just an unbelievable compliment, I think. And I know Tom blessed it, and Kenny blessed it. And so again, having the respect of your peers to be given that opportunity, it's unfortunate that we didn't go further in the competition, because I think the hulls that we had were really good. There were things that we were limited by budget wise, and that was the kind of the beginning of the billionaires that had gotten into the game, and so the arms race was really getting escalated there. And as I later learned when I joined Team New Zealand, we were always going to be up against it with that team, because it just was going to be resource strapped. And yet, I can remember going to his house and as if it was yesterday, because it was just so cool. And, you could just sit and listen to his stories about all those races. And he's got an incredibly sharp mind. Through this experience here at American Magic in the last 6 months, I've received emails and notes from him, and they always end with, of all the emails that I've received, these are the most appreciated, because there's somebody who, has achieved greatness in the sport, and to have him take the time to email me, it was just, that's, I don't know, you still have to pinch yourself.
Those debriefs here in 2003 with Dennis Connor must have been pretty intense. Kenny tells the story of Connor having not gone to any of the press conferences, deciding to go to the press conference, and blames himself for the lost races, then qualifies it by saying he was in the wrong because he'd clearly hired a boatload of idiots. I mean, how intense were those days sailing for Dennis?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't remember it. Like, I never tuned into any of that because I was one layer removed from it. I can see that being incredibly sore for Kenny because, as I said earlier, I think Kenny's an incredible sailor. And later, when we were done with the Stars and Stripes in that same year, we went and won the Congressional Cup, and then he went and caned everybody at the Etchel 22 Worlds to prove something. And so I think at that point it's hard. Filling those shoes is a really difficult thing. And, Dennis's scorecard in the America's Cup is unmatched. And so, that was always going to be a hard thing to harder than most, because either if you win, then you're carrying the legend of Dennis Conner and the Stars and Stripes, and if you don't win, then then it's equally as painful.
In the end, DC's campaign, as you say, was short of budget and couldn't compete with the well-funded challengers of Oracle and Alinghi by then. But for the 2007 Cup in Valencia, you would wear the black shirt of New Zealand, tactician for Dean Barker. I mean, how did that happen? There's not many foreigners get into that camp.
No. How did that happen? I actually reached out to, it was truly a by chance email. And it was the spring of 2004. And I just wrote Daltz after he was announced as the new managing director of Team New Zealand. I wrote him an email, and before I wrote the email, I asked Tom if I could use him as a reference, and I asked Dennis if I could use him as a reference. And it was about 10 days prior to the Congressional Cup, and he said, "Yeah, I'd love to meet you." They had just gone through a bit of a change because I think Kostecki, John had been hired, and then Oracle came to him, and so something had happened there that he wasn't gonna, so they were a little bit in limbo as well. And he said, "Why don't you come to New Zealand?" I said, "Okay, well, I'm doing the Congressional Cup in Long Beach that we lost to Ed Baird in the final, as painful as that was." He said, "Why don't you come after that?" And I flew down here for a day, and I met with him and with Kevin Shoebridge, and we left with a handshake, and it was all pretty simple. The neat thing about that was, like what I said earlier, it wasn't until I got into Team New Zealand that I realized how we were never, ever going to compete at Stars and Stripes because of this massive infrastructure and the IP that the design team had and the experience that they had as a sailing team with the boat. And each one of these programs kind of hardens you in a different way. And straight away, we went and did a regatta in Valencia that we won. It was kind of the second act. I missed the first act in Marseille because of the Far 40 Worlds. And so I stepped on at the second act and we won the match racing, and I think we won the fleet racing. I'm not sure we actually fleet raced there, but I know we won the match racing. And, straight away you could just see, wow, this is an incredible, not only an incredible team, but an incredible sailing team that has everything that we need. We just need to be kind of guided in the right direction. And Daltz was really good in that regard. Rod Davis was really good in that regard. And yet we were all somewhat new together. I mean, that's the other thing that was, the cycles of these programs, that was new leadership as well. But we all walked into, myself and Daltz and Shub and, some of the people that hadn't been there in 2003, we walked into a reasonably fine-tuned machine. And so this is hindsight. I didn't know it at the time. I was like, well, I'm excited to go sailing, and this is really cool. This is Team New Zealand, so this is really cool. And that's how it started. And we moved down to, in December of 2004, we moved down here and started, integrating and being part of that team.
You made the match.
Yeah.
Yeah, you challenged the mighty Alinghi.
The mighty Alinghi, yep.
I mean, my memory of it was that it was pretty closely fought.
Yeah. So the average race win in that regatta was 19 seconds. And we lost 5-2, and we led 5 of the 7 races at the first stop mark and didn't win the regatta, which is just brutal because, so much emphasis in that program in particular. Statistically, leading up to that regatta, the boat that had won the first cross, from 1992 to 2003, the boat that won the first cross won like 96% of the races. So we put a lot of emphasis in our starting, a lot of emphasis in racing the boat well, and as the racing developed, the one thing that did stand out was that team in particular. We bloodied ourselves on the match racing circuit. We bloodied ourselves in the TP52. We bloodied ourselves just learning our relationships, and the ins and outs of those things that allowed for a really well-oiled machine. But we lost to the faster boat, and that is definitely the America's Cup. And that's what's going to be exciting to see next week. One team is reasonably bloodied. One team's not, but the faster boat's going to win the regatta. And in that 2007 match, straight away, you knew that we were up against it because the first race, we won the right-hand side, the weather end, with like 10 degrees of weather end bias, and came off the line in a really strong spot. And we were going quite a bit over target, and we were just surviving. Like, everything was in our favor, and we were only holding even. And you thought, this is going to be a long regatta if it stays like this. And we went out, we were tied 2-2, and we had a lay day, and then we went out the next day, and we led at the top mark and broke a spinnaker down the run, and had a mistake in the boat handling. And so when you think about pivotal times in a regatta, that was a big race. Winning that race, or at least capitalizing on that, continually asking that question, was a big one. So we lose that race, and then the next race, so race 6, we go out, and again we lead at the top mark, lead to the bottom, take the right hand gate, going upwind, big left shift. Like everything is just in your favor, and there they are, still just at the next time that the next exchange going up the second beat, we only got a lee bow on them, and then they passed us, and we finished a couple boat lengths behind them. And then the last race, which was an awesome race, and we had the penalty to do it to finish, they sailed a really good race. We sailed a really good race, and probably the only flaw was doing the penalty a length too far away from the line. And we lose by a second. So, but we still would have lost because they were faster. So it was just a delaying the inevitable. Not that I remember these things, Shirley.
By now, Terry, Quantum Racing, Doug DeVos's TP52 team, with you in charge, was about to begin its incredible winning streak. Talk to me about that campaign and your relationship with Doug.
Yeah, well, that's the relationship started actually this summer after the 32nd match, where I went sailing with Doug on the WindQuest on his boat, and the quantum racing evolved out of that, and it was a partnership between Doug and Fred Howe, really, the first season. And how that came about was, really Ed Reynolds, his brainchild of how to continue to promote quantum, and to, this great circuit happening at the Med Cup in Europe was a really good platform to demonstrate not only the quality of the quantum product, but the quality of the design and the quality of the people. And So quantum racing was born out of that. And the first season, we started out a bit slow, and we found our stride in the second half of the year, and kind of, ended up winning the Med Cup and won the World Championship in Lanzarote, which was, just incredible opportunity. And I think, as you said, that's where the relationship with Doug started, and really has continued to flourish. The opportunity that he and Hap and Roger and the New York Yacht Club gave us here is you really don't have any words of thanks, because what they did for us all. But they're very competitive guys. They're very patriotic to our country and to what really we represent culturally, and that's something that you get when you come out of Team New Zealand and you see the working for a higher purpose, not just for yourself. That's something that Doug definitely teaches and instills in all of us. But it's not like he, today's lesson is being a good guy. It's not at all how it goes. It's how he conducts himself, how he and how we've evolved our relationship and our friendship. There's certain people that when I look back on in life that you always want to be a better person because of. Doug's one of them. Because he just carries himself in that way, and eternally grateful for not only his friendship but for that type of leadership, because it's just a good reminder to aspire to be something better.
You've dominated the class, for a decade. 5 times world champion, 6 times series champions. A formidable outfit. Why do you think, looking back, has the team been so good for so long? What's the secret, Terry?
Fast boat, at Marcelino Bottin's hands. Really good people, committed people. Great leadership ashore from Ed. Allowing it all to happen in the manner that it does. It's a combination of really good people, consistent leadership, and a really good boat. And inevitably, when one of those pieces is missing, somebody else wins.
It's not that easy to achieve all those things at the same time.
Well, and that's the we started it with the naiveness of myself with American Magic, and it's a hindsight comment because I think we have a lot of really good things here. But as you learn and debrief, you come up against a lot of challenges that the team faced, and in the TP52, we faced a lot of challenges too. We're always working to represent the Quantum brand to the standard that they expect. You have other people that don't want you to win, and the competition itself, the competitors are really, really good, and so you have to be smart with how you prepare. And but what's awesome in particular is once you get into the groove of the racing and you get into the groove of those boats, you leave the dock every day with a certain expectation, and it doesn't mean you always achieve that, but when you come back, where that team has always been really good is being really critical, and then going back out the next day and trying to prove what you had learned that you did poorly the day before, and take it to the next day and then go out and have a good day.
By 2011, Oracle were defending the Cup, and Russell Coutts wanted something new, fresh, to engage, as he called it at the time, the Facebook generation. The boats would be giant multi-hulls. The newly formed America's Cup team, Artemis, had hired Paul Caird as CEO, and he wanted you. How did you feel going into that campaign?
How I felt was, I felt like we'd done a really good job with the quantum racing, and we had done a lot of personal development as a helmsman because I'd been a tactician, and so you're learning again another part of the game, which is exciting. Having started as a helmsman, ended up being a tactician, and then coming back to the helming, it reinvigorates you to go to work every day. And I was and am continually thankful for the opportunity that Torbjorn gave to us, and for the opportunity to work with Paul. I was always proud of the fact that we won the match racing side of the World Series in the AC45, and obviously we know that tragedy that happened there, and it was equally as hard because you always feel a responsibility to the whole thing, even though you're not there completely. And so those boats themselves were incredible pieces of equipment. And yet when you compare it to an AC75, I know the AC75 would cane one of those boats around the race course. So it's equally as incredible.
We filmed you behind the scenes for a week at the Extreme Sailing Series in Istanbul, as we've mentioned, getting some multi-hull race practice, the location of the shaving incident.
Yes.
But I'll never forget how different, Terry, you were on the water, and I hadn't seen that before. I mean, pumped. How would you describe Terry Hutchinson, the competitor?
Yeah, there's something about the competition that gets the adrenaline going and gets the absolute, sometimes it gets the absolute best, and sometimes it gets the absolute worst out of you. And the thing that was really different with the multi-hulls is the pace in which things happened. I was not very experienced at that, and so that inherently got the juices flowing that much more. And the Extreme 40 racing was like the perfect blend because the boats were fast, but it was also very much in my wheelhouse, where it was short course, high emphasis on getting good starts and boat positioning and everything that you learn through 4 years of college sailing. It was like this perfect blend. Lots of racing over the series, and so you always battled for consistency in those regattas.
I also remember, Terry, that dramatic last race at that event. I mean, we were there all week filming you, and we could not have scripted it better.
Yeah.
Can you remember that moment?
I do. The last races in those regattas were double points races, and if Team New Zealand won the race, we had to finish one place behind them with the double point scoring. And we went around the last top mark, and Ian in the GAC boat was right in front of us, and he went buggering off to a different mark, and we deployed and sailed downwind and jibed around another mark, and then reached into the finish, much to the chagrin of Mr. Barker. And you'd have to say that was a bit of a jag. It was probably the right outcome, considering we'd sailed pretty well, but it highlighted the importance of consistency in those regattas, because we had some great days and then we had some equally awful days. And that entire circuit was a really fun experience. It's too bad that it's not in existence in the same caliber that it was, because it was quite the show.
Well, it helped us out. Yeah. Anyway, having followed you for the week, it was great to get a dramatic
at least we got the good result.
During that time, we also filmed with you north of Valencia at the Artemis training base. And I remember we raced against each other in the AC45s, that little made-for-telly little race.
You won, Shirley.
Yeah, I was sailed with Santi Lang. I had some help. And of course, we won. And I remember that, you were really not happy, Terry. But, looking back, I got the feeling that it wasn't perhaps me you were frustrated with, that perhaps it was quite a hard time for you then.
Yeah, that's that whole, again, it's a little bit of hindsight. The things that not a lot of people see with the America's Cup is the impact that it has on families. And basically Shell and Elias and Catherine and Aiden had uprooted their lives and we moved to Spain for a year. And you spent a morning with us, and we had some great memories of being there. But in particular, that time was really hard on Aiden. And you get this I don't know if it's a sense of guilt or frustration, because you always want what's better for your kids. And I could see the impact that it was having negatively on them. We were also, though, I mean, you mentioned Santi. I mean, there were people there that we were incredibly fortunate to work with, and Santi was one of them. And the guy continues to be a legend. And I think during your time there, we were preparing for Venice, in the AC45, Naples and Venice. And we had a reasonably good regatta in Naples in the match racing, and we didn't have some of the fleet racing results. While we had a good last day, we capsized in one of the races and did a lot of damage to the boat. But when you get outside of your comfort level, that's where you find the things the most challenging, and how you react to that. I mean, what I was really proud of with that is that, we were always under a lot of scrutiny, rightfully so. And the fact that we match raced really well, I was really, that was reassuring to the confidence. And then there's the family side of it, which is, like I said, I mean, that was really, really hard. Particularly on the youngest, because he was flourishing at home and he was loving the sailing and, so many things. And, for no fault of his own, he gets yanked out of his environment, and it was hard. And so, I think when I look at it and think about that, we're all incredibly fortunate and grateful, much in the same way that we have from the supporters that we have. But, the families truly are the unsung heroes in all this, because they're as committed, if not more committed, to what we're doing. And they feel the sting of every loss, and they feel the celebration of every win as well. And that's not, again, that's learning and looking at the past, that you realize all that. Because to be successful, I think we all have to be really reasonably self-absorbed at what we're doing, to make sure that we're giving 110%. And yet their 110% is being there every day when the boat goes out and when the boat comes back in, and they're holding up the signs of support and celebrating the success and crying with the failures.
I remember thinking that when we filmed with you. It was a Saturday morning breakfast, probably quite a rare moment, at this all-American family.
Yeah.
Blueberry pancake.
Yeah, that's right.
The kids sitting around the table telling me how competitive you were at Monopoly.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
And I do remember thinking also, how weird it is for them. Here they are, relocated to some really strange country.
Going to a Spanish school and being literally thrown into an environment that is so far out of their comfort zone that it's hard. The beauty of that, though, is, how much of our lives do we spend outside of our comfort zone? And so if they take anything away from it, it's the fact that, more often than not, we are living outside of our comfort zones, be it in competition or in work or whatever it is at the time that we're doing. And so I'd like to think that, in that regard, they're better prepared for life.
Stories from the very candid Terry Hutchinson. Terry, thank you. I hope you all enjoyed hearing about Terry's early career. In part 2, Terry relives his AC36 journey. It was a cup full of drama, intense. It's really worth a listen. It's a fascinating insight into the world of Terry's America's Cup team, American Magic. As always, we love to hear from you, so please reach out, let us know what you think, like and subscribe on whatever platform you found us on. And please do consider visiting buymeacoffee.com facebook.com/sailing podcast. If you're enjoying what we do here on the pod, we really strive to bring you a high quality listen. I hope you think it's worth supporting. We love having you along. As always, the podcast is produced by Tim at Vertigo Films. So a big thanks to him and also to the media team at American Magic, Will Rickardson and his team. They're a great bunch to work with. Settle down for the roller coaster ride in part 2 with Terry Hutchinson. And until next time, thank you so much for listening. Have fun on the water and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane line is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here.
Ho, ho, ho. That's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there.
We're looking at 10.5 and 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah. Copy.
This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.